The morning sun had barely climbed over the tall buildings when the city already buzzed with news. Outside the grand courthouse, cameras clicked, reporters shouted, and curious passers-by tried to peek inside. It was not just any trial. Inside those stone walls, one of the country's most powerful men, billionaire Adrian Cole, was fighting for his future. Adrian had always been a man who drew attention. Known for his wealth, his sharp business mind, and his bold personality, he had built an empire that stretched across real estate, technology, and investments. People admired him, but many also envied him. Some believed he had achieved success fairly, while others whispered that shortcuts and hidden deals were part of his story. Now those whispers had turned into a storm, and the courtroom was the stage where truth or downfall would be decided. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of journalists, business rivals, and ordinary citizens who had fought for a seat to witness history. Everyone wanted to see what would happen to Adrian Cole. Some secretly wished to see his empire crumble, while others hoped he would walk free, proving his innocence. At the defense table, Adrian sat tall in his dark suit, though his eyes betrayed a trace of worry. He was used to boardrooms, not courtrooms. He was used to controlling the narrative, not being questioned. But today the power was not in his hands. It was in the hands of his lawyer. At least that was what he thought. His lawyer, a well-known figure in the legal world, had promised a strong defense. He had arrived with files, arguments, and confidence. For weeks he had assured Adrian that the case would collapse under scrutiny, but when the trial reached its most important stage, something unthinkable happened. The lawyer stood up, adjusted his tie, and with a heavy sigh, announced that he could no longer represent his client. The reason he gave was vague, wrapped in legal terms, but the truth was clear to everyone watching. He was abandoning the billionaire at the very moment he was needed most. Gasps filled the courtroom. Some leaned forward, whispering to their neighbors. The judge raised an eyebrow, surprised but bound by law to allow the withdrawal. Adrian turned sharply toward his lawyer, disbelief painted on his face. "You can't leave now." Adrian's voice cracked with frustration, though he tried to keep it steady. But the lawyer avoided his eyes, collected his briefcase, and walked out, leaving Adrian alone at the table. The cameras outside the courtroom were quick to capture the news. Within minutes, the headlines would scream, "Billionaire's lawyer walks out." For many, this was the signal that the empire of Adrian Cole was finally falling apart. Inside the room, silence followed. All eyes were fixed on the billionaire who sat frozen, his mind racing. His fortune, his reputation, and possibly his freedom were on the line, and now he had no one to speak for him. The prosecutors, sitting across the room, exchanged small smiles, their confidence rising. They knew that without a lawyer, Adrian was as good as defeated. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, you now stand without legal representation. Do you wish to request a postponement to find another lawyer?" Adrian opened his mouth, but no words came out. Postponement meant time, but time was also his enemy. Every delay was another chance for the public to lose trust, for his businesses to collapse, for his rivals to take advantage. He felt cornered, and for the first time in years, Adrian Cole, the man who had never bent to pressure, felt helpless. And then, in the back row, a small sound broke the silence. It was not the sound of a lawyer clearing his throat or a journalist scribbling notes. It was the sound of a young voice, nervous yet bold, rising above the tension. "I can defend him." Heads turned instantly. Reporters looked up from their notebooks. The judge frowned, searching for the source. Adrian himself turned, confused, scanning the faces behind him. The words had come from Daniel, a teenage boy sitting quietly in the last row. His clothes were simple, his shoes slightly worn, and his hands clutched the wooden bench as though he had surprised even himself by speaking out. Daniel was not a lawyer, nor was he part of the elite crowd gathered in the courtroom. He was the son of a maid who worked in Adrian Cole's household. No one had noticed him enter. He had slipped in quietly, sitting away from the center of attention, watching with wide eyes as events unfolded. For him, Adrian Cole was not just a billionaire on trial. He was the man who had provided his mother with work, the man whose house he had grown up visiting while she cleaned. To Daniel, Adrian was more than a headline. He was someone his family depended on, someone he believed did not deserve to be abandoned in this way. When Daniel saw the lawyer walk out and the billionaire left alone, something inside him stirred. He thought of his mother, who always told him that silence in the face of injustice was as heavy as guilt. He thought of the law books he had picked up from second-hand shops, the nights he had spent reading them out of curiosity, fascinated by the language of justice. He thought of how unfair it felt to see a man, no matter how rich, left defenseless when the whole world was ready to condemn him. So, before he even realized it, he had stood up and spoken the words, "I can defend him." The courtroom erupted. Some laughed softly, thinking it was a childish outburst. Others murmured in disbelief. A few reporters quickly scribbled down the boy's words, sensing a story that would travel faster than any verdict. The judge leaned forward. "Who said that?" Daniel straightened his shoulders and raised his hand. "I did, Your Honor." Gasps filled the room again. Adrian stared at the boy, confusion and disbelief mixing in his eyes. Who was this child? What did he mean by defending him? This was not a game. It was a trial that could decide his entire future. But as Adrian studied Daniel's face, he noticed something unusual. The boy's eyes were not mocking, not playful. They were steady, filled with determination far beyond his years. The judge's frown deepened. "Young man, this is a court of law, not a classroom for children. Do you understand the seriousness of what you just said?" Daniel nodded firmly. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And I mean it. I want to defend him." The room fell into silence again. For a moment, even the prosecutors stopped smiling. Something about the boy's courage unsettled them. He was not afraid of being laughed at, nor was he intimidated by the grand setting. He stood there, small yet unshaken, like a candle refusing to go out in a storm. Adrian leaned back slowly in his chair. He still did not know what this boy could possibly do, but in that strange moment, when the world seemed ready to crush him, the voice of a Maid's son felt like the only lifeline offered to him, and that was how the story began. Not with polished lawyers or powerful allies, but with a boy who dared to raise his voice when silence would have been easier. The courtroom was silent for a moment, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel stood there, small in size but immense in courage. People stared, whispering to one another. Some laughed quietly, thinking it was impossible that a teenage boy could defend one of the richest men in the country. Others exchanged doubtful glances, unsure whether the boy even understood what he had just promised. Adrian Cole could hardly believe what was happening. The man who had faced countless adversaries, outsmarted competitors, and handled crises that could break lesser men, now found himself staring at a boy who had never practiced in court. His mind raced, trying to process whether this was a joke, a stunt, or something more. Yet as he studied Daniel, he noticed a strange intensity in the boy's eyes, something he had never seen before in anyone so young. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Young man, you have declared that you wish to defend Mr. Cole. Are you aware that you are not a licensed attorney?" "Yes, Your Honor," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I know I am not a lawyer, but I have studied law books and I have watched many trials. I believe I can help him," the courtroom murmured again. Journalists scribbled furiously, sensing a story that would captivate the public. Cameras clicked and flashed, capturing the moment that would soon appear on every news channel. Some spectators shook their heads, unable to comprehend the audacity of a teenager daring to challenge the legal system. Adrian shifted in his seat. Part of him wanted to stop the boy immediately, to insist on a postponement until a real lawyer could be found. But another part, an unexpected part, was touched by the courage before him. He remembered how his own life had been shaped by taking risks, by believing in people who seemed underestimated. Perhaps he thought this boy had something to offer. The judge looked thoughtful. "Mr. Cole," he said slowly, "it is your right to have a lawyer. You may choose to proceed with a non-professional at your own risk. Do you wish to continue?" Adrian exhaled slowly. Every muscle in his body was tense. His instinct told him that this was dangerous, that a teenager could easily make mistakes that would ruin him. But time was short and he had no one else. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, let him try," he said. The court reacted with surprise. The judge raised an eyebrow but allowed the boy to approach the defense table. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he walked toward the billionaire. Every step felt heavy with responsibility, yet he kept his eyes fixed ahead. He had prepared for this not by studying to impress anyone, but because he wanted to do what was right. Adrian extended a hand, unsure what to say. Daniel shook it firmly, surprising the billionaire with his composure. "I'll do my best," Daniel said simply. Adrian managed a small, uneasy smile. "That's all anyone can ask," he replied. The first witness of the day was called, and Daniel watched carefully. He had studied the case files his mother had secretly passed to him during late evenings at home. He had memorized key dates, financial records, and statements. He had spent countless nights imagining how he would speak in a courtroom, preparing questions and arguments. Now it was time to act. The prosecutor began, confident and smooth. They expected the boy to falter, to stumble, and to provide no real defense. Their questions were sharp, their words designed to confuse and intimidate. But Daniel listened intently. He did not react with fear. Instead, he waited, calculated, and observed. He noticed contradictions, small gaps in the story, and statements that did not align with the evidence. When the moment came to respond, Daniel spoke. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he said politely. "May I ask a question?" The judge nodded, curiosity lighting his face. "Proceed." Daniel turned to the witness. "You said that Mr. Cole was present at the meeting on June 15th. But according to the visitor logs of his office, he was in another city that day. Can you explain this?" A ripple of shock passed through the courtroom. The witness hesitated, searching for an answer, but no immediate response came. The prosecutor looked frustrated, whispering to colleagues and shaking their head. Even Adrian felt a flicker of hope. The moment was small but significant. Daniel had noticed a detail others had overlooked. It was not the flashy, dramatic defense of a trained lawyer, but it was precise, thoughtful, and effective. He was not intimidated by the grandeur of the courtroom or the authority of the adults around him. He focused only on truth. As the trial continued, Daniel began to gain confidence. Each witness, each piece of evidence became a puzzle he was determined to solve. He pointed out discrepancies in documents, asked questions that made lawyers frown, and carefully connected facts that others had ignored. People began to watch him differently, not as a child, but as someone who had an unusual talent for logic and observation. Outside the courtroom, reporters scrambled to tell the story. "Teenager takes on billionaire's trial," one headline read. "Maid's son challenges courtroom giants," another declared. Social media exploded with admiration, disbelief, and curiosity. People shared videos of the boy asking questions, and soon Daniel's face became known nationwide. He had stepped into a world far beyond his years, and yet he navigated it with courage and care. At the defense table, Adrian began to see a change in the atmosphere. The prosecutors, once confident and arrogant, now hesitated before each response. The courtroom, filled with tension and anticipation, had shifted in favor of the unexpected. Adrian's own staff watched in amazement, whispering to each other about the boy's intelligence and bravery. Despite the growing recognition, Daniel remained humble. He did not act out for attention. He did not seek praise or reward. His focus was on fairness, on making sure the truth was revealed. He occasionally glanced at his mother, who sat quietly at the back, tears in her eyes but pride in her heart. She had never imagined that the boy who helped her tidy the house, who asked questions about business and law while others played, would one day stand in a courtroom defending a billionaire. Hours passed like minutes as Daniel continued. He questioned witnesses with calm precision, highlighted errors in the prosecution's timeline, and reminded everyone that even the smallest detail mattered. Each moment built his confidence, and each acknowledgement from the judge, however subtle, encouraged him to keep going. By late afternoon, it was clear to everyone watching that the trial had taken an unexpected turn. The story was no longer just about Adrian Cole facing charges. It was about a young boy who refused to back down, a boy who believed that justice should be fair no matter who was involved. Adrian, who had entered the day feeling powerless and abandoned, now felt something he had not experienced in a long time. Hope. He realized that courage does not always come in the form of wealth, power, or experience. Sometimes it comes in the smallest packages, in the quiet confidence of someone determined to do what is right. Daniel, the maid's son, continued to speak, ask questions, and analyze evidence. Every step he took, every word he spoke was watched, recorded, and admired. The courtroom, once filled with doubt and skepticism, had begun to respect him. He was no longer just a boy in the back row. He had become a symbol of bravery and intelligence. And though the trial was far from over, the first steps of Daniel's defense had already made history. He had proven that even the youngest and least expected person could make a difference. He had shown that courage, preparation, and honesty could stand tall in the face of doubt, mockery, and overwhelming odds. By the end of the day, Daniel returned to his seat, exhausted but unbroken. His mother reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly, proud beyond words. Adrian watched him with renewed respect, silently acknowledging that this boy had already done more than anyone could have expected. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the story of the Maid's son defending a billionaire would linger long after. People outside whispered, cameras clicked one last time, and the city began to buzz with the tale of courage that had unfolded within those walls. Daniel, who had entered that day as a quiet boy from a humble home, had stepped into history. He did not seek fame, but his actions spoke louder than words. He had taken the first step in a journey that would change not only the outcome of the trial, but also the lives of everyone who witnessed his bravery. And though the trial still had many challenges ahead, one thing was certain: Daniel was ready. He would continue to fight, to question, to challenge, and to stand firm no matter how difficult the road became. For him, defending Adrian Cole was not about money, influence, or recognition. It was about doing what was right. The next morning, the courtroom was buzzing with anticipation. Word had spread quickly about the boy who had dared to defend a billionaire. Reporters crowded the benches, their cameras trained on Daniel and Adrian. Curious onlookers tried to find a place to watch the unfolding drama. The air was thick with expectation, as if everyone knew that something extraordinary was about to happen. Daniel arrived early, clutching his notebook and a few carefully organized papers. Though he had studied every detail of the case, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had never faced anything like this before. Adults in the courtroom were trained professionals. They had experience, authority, and knowledge that he did not yet fully possess. And yet Daniel reminded himself of one simple truth. Courage was not about size, age, or experience. It was about standing up when it mattered most. Adrian Cole sat at the defense table, his eyes fixed on the boy. He felt a mix of hope and anxiety. Could this child really help him? Could someone so young navigate the complexities of a trial that had shaken even the most experienced lawyers? Adrian had faced pressure before, but nothing compared to the vulnerability he felt now. He had no one else, and Daniel was his only chance. The judge called the session to order, and the first witness of the day was summoned. This witness had been prepared carefully by the prosecution and was known for giving detailed, confident statements. Everyone assumed the boy would be intimidated, or worse, make a mistake that would ruin Adrian's defense. The witness began to speak, delivering a long and detailed account of what supposedly happened on the day in question. Daniel listened carefully, scribbling notes in his notebook. His brow furrowed as he noticed inconsistencies, contradictions, and small details that did not add up. It was not enough to know facts. He had to present them in a way that the judge and jury could understand. When the prosecutor finished questioning, Daniel took a deep breath. He rose from his seat, his heart racing, and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, may I ask a few questions?" The courtroom fell silent. The judge studied the boy, skeptical yet intrigued. "You may proceed," he said slowly. Daniel approached the witness calmly, his hands slightly trembling but his voice clear. "You said Mr. Cole signed this document on July 10th, he began, holding up a paper for everyone to see. But this document was stored in the company's main office, and according to the timestamp, it could not have been signed on that day. "Can you explain this?" The witness hesitated, blinking nervously. The prosecutors exchanged glances, clearly frustrated by the boy's sharp observation. Daniel's question was simple, yet it revealed a critical flaw in the prosecution's argument. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Spectators whispered to each other, astonished that a teenager could notice such a detail. Adrian Cole leaned forward, a glimmer of hope lighting his eyes. Perhaps this boy was more capable than anyone had imagined, but the challenge was far from over. After Daniel's first question, the prosecutors tried to regain control. They asked him questions meant to confuse, intimidate, and undermine his credibility. They questioned his age, his knowledge, and his right to speak in the courtroom. Some sneered, hoping to make him falter. Daniel took a deep breath. He knew he could not respond with anger or fear. He had to stay calm, measured, and polite. "I understand I am not a licensed lawyer," he said respectfully, "but I have studied the case and the documents carefully. I am here to point out facts that are true and relevant. The judge nodded, impressed by the boy's composure. Very well. Continue, but keep your questions relevant and concise, he instructed. Daniel returned to his notes. Each question was chosen carefully. He focused on contradictions, on details overlooked by the adults in the room, and on evidence that had been misrepresented. With each point he raised, the courtroom's attitude began to shift. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, journalists scribbled faster, and even the skeptical lawyers had to pause and consider his observations. Still, the boy faced obstacles. Many witnesses were intimidating, speaking confidently and sometimes dismissively. Some looked down at him, clearly believing he could not understand the complexities of the case. Daniel felt his pulse quicken when a particularly aggressive lawyer tried to confuse him with legal jargon. He paused, thinking quickly, then asked the question in his own words, focusing on the facts rather than the complex terms. To everyone's surprise, the judge allowed it. The courtroom had never seen a defense like this, direct, factual, and rooted in careful observation rather than theatrical arguments or legal maneuvering. Daniel's approach was different, but it worked. Slowly, the tension began to shift away from ridicule and toward cautious respect. Adrian observed everything silently, amazed. He realized that his hope was not misplaced. The boy's ability to notice small inconsistencies, his courage to speak up, and his determination to follow the truth made him a surprising ally. Adrian could feel the tension easing slightly, though he knew the trial was far from over. Outside the courtroom, news spread quickly. Teen defender challenges billionaire's trial, one headline read. Social media buzzed with videos of Daniel asking precise questions, and people began to discuss the extraordinary courage of a young boy who had entered a world far beyond his years. Some doubted his ability, but many were inspired by his determination. Inside the courtroom, Daniel continued to build momentum. He asked questions that were logical, polite, and direct. Each time a witness wavered or stumbled, the courtroom reacted. The prosecuting attorneys grew visibly frustrated, realizing that their usual tactics of intimidation and complex legal language were not working. Daniel had an advantage they could not ignore. He spoke the truth clearly and fearlessly. Despite his growing confidence, Daniel felt the weight of responsibility. Every word he spoke mattered. One mistake could damage Adrian's defense and undo the progress he had made. He reminded himself to stay focused, to breathe, and to rely on what he had learned from books, observations, and hours of careful preparation. By midday, the mood in the courtroom had shifted. Spectators were no longer whispering in disbelief but watching in fascination. Daniel had earned their attention, and even some of the skeptical lawyers began to nod quietly at his points. Adrian Cole sat quietly, absorbing the reality that a boy with courage, honesty, and knowledge could stand firm in the face of immense pressure. As the day went on, Daniel faced another challenge, a key witness whose testimony was intended to be devastating for the defense. The witness spoke confidently, presenting evidence and statements that seemed overwhelming. Daniel's stomach tightened, and for a moment fear flickered in his mind. Could he handle this? Could he challenge someone who had years of experience? Then he remembered his mother's words. Courage is not about being fearless. It is about standing up even when you are scared. He took a deep breath, adjusted his notes, and approached the witness. Calmly, politely, and with precision, he began to ask questions that slowly revealed inconsistencies. One by one, the witness's statements started to unravel, exposing gaps that had been carefully hidden. The courtroom gasped. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. The prosecutors whispered among themselves, frustrated that their carefully constructed argument was being dismantled by a boy who had no formal legal training. Spectators whispered, murmuring their astonishment. Daniel's strategy was working, and the momentum of the trial was beginning to shift in favor of the defense. By the end of the day, Daniel returned to his seat, exhausted but unbroken. His mother, sitting quietly in the back, squeezed his hand and smiled, proud beyond words. Adrian looked at him with a mixture of relief and admiration. This boy had done what many adults thought impossible. He had earned credibility in a courtroom where his age and inexperience had seemed like insurmountable obstacles. Daniel knew that the trial was far from over. There were many challenges ahead, many witnesses and arguments yet to come. But he also knew something important. Courage, preparation, and honesty could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. He had proven to himself and everyone watching that he could stand his ground, think clearly, and act decisively. As the courtroom emptied for the day, reporters gathered outside to capture the story. Social media buzzed with admiration and disbelief. People discussed the courage of a young boy who had challenged a complex trial and earned respect in a world dominated by adults. Daniel had not only defended Adrian Cole, he had also captured the imagination of a nation. And though the trial was still ongoing, Daniel had taken the first step toward something extraordinary. He had shown that even the smallest voice, when guided by courage and truth, could make a difference. He had faced ridicule, doubt, and fear, and had stood firm. And as he left the courtroom with his mother that evening, he carried with him the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had begun a journey that would change lives, challenge expectations, and prove that courage often comes from the most unexpected places. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the courtroom, illuminating the polished wooden benches and the rows of anxious spectators. The tension in the room was thicker than ever. Daniel had spent the previous day carefully listening, analyzing and asking questions, and now the trial had entered a critical stage. The prosecution had summoned a key witness whose testimony, if unchallenged, could be devastating for Adrian Cole. Everyone in the courtroom knew that this moment could decide the direction of the trial. Daniel adjusted his notes, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves in his stomach. He had prepared for this moment for weeks. He remembered the nights he had spent at home, quietly studying law books his mother had collected, writing down important points, and imagining how he would speak in court. Now that preparation was about to be tested in the most important way. Adrian Cole sat at the defense table, quietly observing the young boy before him. There was a mixture of hope and fear in his eyes. He knew that Daniel had courage, intelligence, and determination, but this was the most significant witness of the trial. The slightest mistake could undo everything they had worked for. The judge called the witness forward, a confident-looking man in his 40s who carried a folder of documents. He had a calm, measured voice, and he spoke with authority, clearly accustomed to the attention of the courtroom. His testimony began in a confident tone, presenting a detailed account of the alleged events that had formed the foundation of the prosecution's case. The courtroom listened intently. The prosecuting attorneys leaned forward, ready to challenge any interruption. Many spectators murmured, imagining that this witness could finally crush the young defender's hopes. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He focused on the facts, reminding himself that confidence alone could not win this trial. He needed to be precise, logical, and observant. When the witness finished the initial statement, Daniel raised his hand politely. "Your Honor," he said, "may I ask a few questions?" The judge studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You may proceed, Mr. Daniel, but remember to keep your questions relevant and respectful." Daniel nodded, stepping carefully toward the witness. His small hands held his notes, and his voice, though soft at first, gained strength as he began to speak. "You mentioned that Mr. Cole approved the financial transactions on July 20th, he began, showing a copy of the document. However, according to the company's internal logs, Mr. Cole was out of the city on that date. Can you explain this discrepancy?" The witness paused, blinking in surprise. He had expected a rehearsed question or a small challenge, but not this. Daniel's words were precise, pointing to a factual contradiction that could not easily be ignored. The prosecuting attorneys whispered urgently among themselves, frustrated that the boy had noticed something so significant. The courtroom fell silent, waiting for the response. The witness's calm demeanor began to falter. "Well, I suppose the logs might have been recorded incorrectly," he muttered, clearly searching for a way to defend the statement he had made. Daniel nodded politely, maintaining eye contact. "Thank you. I just want the facts to be clear for the record, Your Honor." A murmur of surprise ran through the audience. Spectators who had doubted the boy's ability were now leaning forward in interest. Adrian Cole's staff exchanged looks of quiet astonishment. Even the judge, who had seen countless lawyers in his career, raised an eyebrow at the young boy's careful questioning. The next phase of questioning was even more challenging. The witness had prepared thoroughly, anticipating attacks from skilled lawyers, but Daniel's approach was different. He did not rely on aggressive tactics or intimidation. He asked clear, logical questions that highlighted inconsistencies, contradictions, and missing details. Each question chipped away at the witness's confidence, revealing small but important flaws in the testimony. Daniel's strategy began to work. The witness started to hesitate, stumbling over his words and rechecking his notes. The prosecutor's frustration became more visible as they realized that their carefully constructed argument was being undermined by someone with no formal training in law. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. Where there had been doubt and ridicule yesterday, there was now cautious respect. Adrian Cole could hardly believe what was happening. The boy who had seemed so fragile and inexperienced was now challenging one of the most important witnesses of the trial. His calm, methodical approach, combined with the courage to speak up, was making a real impact. Adrian felt a surge of relief and admiration. He realized that Daniel's unique perspective, unaffected by ego or authority, was precisely what the defense needed. Outside the courtroom, reporters scrambled to document the moment. Social media buzzed with videos of the young defender questioning the witness, and headlines began to appear. Teenager stuns courtroom with precise questions. Maid's son uncovers flaws in Billionaire's case. People across the city were talking about the courage of a boy who had dared to stand up in a world dominated by adults and authority figures. Back in the courtroom, Daniel pressed forward. He carefully connected facts that had seemed unrelated, showing how certain statements contradicted records, emails, and other evidence. Each observation was simple, logical, and clear, yet it carried enormous weight. The audience could see the truth emerging before their eyes piece by piece. The witness, now visibly nervous, tried to defend his statements, but found himself cornered by the boy's careful logic. Each answer only raised further questions, and Daniel used them methodically to highlight weaknesses in the testimony. The prosecuting attorneys leaned forward, whispering in frustration, realizing that their carefully planned narrative was beginning to unravel. Even the judge seemed impressed. While he remained neutral, his expressions betrayed interest and curiosity. He recognized that the boy was not acting recklessly. Every question was deliberate, every observation grounded in evidence. Daniel had earned a level of credibility that no one had expected. As the session continued, the courtroom began to feel like a stage where a young mind was reshaping the trial. Spectators whispered in admiration. Journalists typed furiously, and Adrian Cole's hope grew steadily. The boy had taken a situation that seemed hopeless and transformed it into an opportunity for truth. Daniel's mother sat quietly in the back, holding her hands together tightly. She felt a mix of worry and pride. Her son had never been formally trained, yet he was standing firm in the face of pressure, fear, and doubt. She realized that this was more than a legal battle. It was a lesson in courage, determination, and integrity. By the afternoon, the turning point became clear. The witness's testimony had begun to lose its strength, while Daniel's precise questions had exposed errors and contradictions that could not be ignored. The prosecutors realized that the courtroom was no longer under their control. They had underestimated a boy who relied on logic, preparation, and courage rather than authority and intimidation. Adrian, watching silently, finally allowed himself a small smile. He had entered the trial feeling powerless and abandoned, but now he saw hope. This boy, this unexpected defender, was changing the course of the trial. Daniel was not just asking questions, he was revealing truth, challenging false assumptions, and holding everyone accountable. As the day came to a close, Daniel returned to his seat exhausted but triumphant. He had faced one of the trial's most important witnesses and had begun to turn the momentum in favor of the defense. His mother squeezed his hand, proud beyond words, and Adrian Cole nodded at him, silently acknowledging the courage, skill, and determination that had carried them through one of the trial's most critical moments. Outside the courtroom, the story spread like wildfire. People were talking not only about the billionaire on trial, but also about the teenage boy who had dared to step into a world that seemed far beyond his reach. Daniel had become a symbol of hope and courage, showing that determination, preparation, and honesty could challenge even the most daunting obstacles. And as Daniel left the courtroom that evening, notebook in hand and his mother by his side, he knew one thing for certain. The trial was far from over, but he had proven that courage and truth could make a difference. The turning point had come, and from now on, every step he took in the courtroom would continue to shape the story of a boy who refused to be underestimated. The courtroom was packed even more than the previous days. Word of the young boy defending Adrian Cole had spread far beyond the city, and everyone wanted to witness the conclusion of this extraordinary story. Reporters lined the walls, cameras poised to capture every moment. Spectators whispered excitedly, eager to see whether the young defender would succeed or falter in the final stretch. Daniel sat at the defense table, his notebook neatly organized in front of him. He had spent the previous days carefully analyzing every piece of evidence, preparing questions and anticipating strategies from the prosecution. He was exhausted, but his mind was sharp, and his resolve was stronger than ever. He knew that the final stage of the trial would be the most challenging, but he also understood that he had a unique advantage: clarity, honesty, and courage. Adrian Cole, seated beside him, appeared calm outwardly, but his hands fidgeted slightly. He had faced challenges before, but nothing compared to relying on a teenager to defend him in a courtroom filled with trained professionals. Despite the tension, a flicker of hope had grown over the past days. Daniel had already turned the tide, exposing inconsistencies, questioning witnesses skillfully, and earning respect from the judge and spectators alike. Now the final witnesses would present their evidence, and the outcome of the trial hung in the balance. The first witness of the day was called. This witness had been expected to be the strongest for the prosecution, with testimony designed to secure a conviction. Daniel listened intently as the witness began speaking, noting every word, every gesture, and every detail that could reveal uncertainty or contradiction. He scribbled notes quickly, organizing his thoughts for precise and effective questioning. When the witness concluded their initial statement, Daniel rose, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Your Honor," he said politely, "may I ask a few questions?" The judge, now familiar with the boy's methodical approach, nodded. "You may proceed, Mr. Daniel. Keep your questions relevant and concise." Daniel approached the witness carefully. He spoke clearly, using simple and direct language. "You stated that Mr. Cole was responsible for approving the transactions on June 25th. However, according to the internal company records and email communications, he was attending meetings in another city at that time. Can you clarify this?" The witness paused, taken aback by the precision of the question. Daniel had uncovered another key discrepancy, one that the prosecution had hoped would go unnoticed. The attorneys whispered urgently among themselves, frustrated that a teenager with no formal training had identified a critical flaw. Daniel continued, connecting facts and evidence in a logical sequence. He pointed out small errors in documents, inconsistencies in witness statements, and gaps in the timeline that had been overlooked. Each observation was simple yet powerful, gradually dismantling the credibility of the prosecution's case. Spectators leaned forward, journalists typed furiously, and the courtroom atmosphere shifted once more. Where skepticism had existed, respect and admiration now took its place. Adrian Cole watched in awe as the boy questioned the witness. Every detail, every point had been carefully considered. Daniel's courage and intelligence were transforming the trial, showing that even someone young and inexperienced could challenge authority with knowledge and determination. Adrian felt a deep sense of gratitude, realizing that his fate rested in the hands of someone who believed in truth above all else. The prosecution attempted to regain control, introducing evidence they believed would be decisive. They presented documents, charts, and expert testimony, expecting the boy to falter. Daniel listened patiently, reviewing each piece of evidence and considering the best way to question it. He did not panic or rush. Instead, he approached each point logically, highlighting errors, omissions, or contradictions in a manner that was calm, respectful, and persuasive. As the trial progressed, it became evident that Daniel's methodical approach was having a profound effect. Witnesses faltered under his questions. Prosecutors became frustrated, and even the judge took notice of the boy's remarkable clarity and courage. The courtroom had transformed into a place where facts, observation, and honesty outweighed experience and intimidation. Daniel was not just defending Adrian Cole. He was redefining the way justice could be pursued. By late afternoon, the final witness had concluded, and it was time for closing statements. Daniel's heart raced as he prepared to summarize the defense. Though he was nervous, he felt a deep sense of confidence. He knew that the truth had been presented clearly, and that the inconsistencies and errors he had revealed would not go unnoticed. Standing carefully, Daniel addressed the courtroom. His voice was calm but firm, and his words carried the weight of careful preparation and unwavering honesty. He recapped the key points of the trial: the contradictions in witness statements, the errors in documents, and the overlooked evidence that showed Adrian Cole's innocence. He spoke directly to the judge in the audience, not with arrogance, but with clarity and conviction. "Your Honor," Daniel said, "Mr. Cole has always acted with integrity. The evidence presented by the prosecution contains errors and inconsistencies that cannot be ignored. I have pointed out the facts that prove he could not have been responsible for the actions he is accused of. I ask that the court consider the truth carefully and fairly." The courtroom was silent, hanging on every word. Spectators whispered to each other. Journalists recorded every sentence, and even the prosecuting attorneys paused to consider the points the boy had raised. Daniel's statement, simple yet precise, carried more weight than anyone had anticipated. Adrian Cole felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to hope. The young boy who had declared, "I can defend him," had done exactly that. He had stood firm, relied on preparation and honesty, and confronted powerful adversaries with courage. The judge, after a thoughtful pause, finally spoke. "This court has heard the arguments and examined the evidence presented over the course of this trial. It is clear that many inconsistencies and errors exist in the testimony and documentation provided. After careful consideration, I find that the prosecution has not met the burden of proof." Gasps and murmurs filled the courtroom. Adrian Cole exhaled deeply, a mixture of relief and gratitude flooding through him. The verdict was in his favor. He had been acquitted, and his innocence confirmed, not by a team of elite lawyers, but by a young boy with courage, intelligence, and determination. Spectators erupted in applause, and journalists scrambled to capture the moment. Cameras flashed as Adrian stood and approached Daniel, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You saved me," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "I cannot thank you enough." Daniel smiled shyly, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "I just wanted to do what was right," he replied simply. Outside the courtroom, the story spread rapidly. Headlines celebrated the bravery and intelligence of the young defender. "Teenager defends billionaire and wins." "Maid's son stuns courtroom with courage and clarity." Social media buzzed with admiration, and people across the city discussed the extraordinary courage of a boy who had dared to challenge adults and authority with honesty and preparation. Adrian Cole, once proud and distant, approached Daniel's mother. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Your son has not only saved me but shown all of us the meaning of courage, honesty, and determination. I am forever grateful." Daniel's mother smiled, tears in her eyes. She had always known her son was special, but seeing him stand in a courtroom, face powerful adversaries, and succeed in defending a man many thought guilty filled her with pride beyond words. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I am so proud of you." Daniel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The trial had been a journey of courage, preparation, and truth. He had faced fear, doubt, and intimidation, yet he had remained steadfast. He had proven that even the smallest voice, when guided by honesty and determination, could make a profound difference. In the days that followed, Daniel's story continued to inspire. People spoke about his courage, his intelligence, and his unwavering sense of justice. He had become a symbol of hope, proving that determination and integrity could challenge even the most formidable obstacles. For Adrian Cole, the experience had been humbling. He realized that wealth and power could not replace courage, intelligence, and honesty. The boy who had once seemed too young and inexperienced had shown him the true meaning of loyalty and bravery. Daniel, despite the attention and praise, remained humble. He returned to his studies, continued to learn about law, and focused on helping others when he could. The trial had changed his life, but he never let fame or recognition distract him from his principles. The courtroom, once filled with tension, doubt, and skepticism, had witnessed something extraordinary. A boy armed with courage, preparation, and honesty had defended a billionaire and ensured that justice was served. The story of Daniel and Adrian Cole became a lasting reminder that integrity and bravery can rise from the most unexpected places, and that even the smallest voice can make a difference in the world.